Everyone loves a 0 day. They're exciting. That's why a lot of us ended up doing security work in the first place. Realistically, though, no matter how good a news story they make, when they're discovered, how much fun we can have with them, we all know that most security breaches have nothing to do with them. They're from someone clicking on a link in a phishing email and entering their details into a fake website. That's how everything starts, right? Statistics suggest that somewhere between 80 and 90% of attacks start with phishing email. Inevitably, humans are always going to be the biggest vulnerability in any system, the least secure part. And it's likely that's not going to change anytime soon. Humans generally don't. But why we need security, because of how our model of computing is starting to change, might. Traditionally, security vulnerabilities mean access. Access means data. We defend our systems to prevent data loss. But sometimes the problems with the Internet of Things security are different. The reason why we're defending the systems are different. The grandmother of all IoT malware is Stuxnet. Who remembers Stuxnet? Yeah, getting some nods. Stuxnet was the first malicious computer worm uncovered back in 2010. But the software had been developed for about 5 years at that point. Now, just in case there are people in the audience that don't remember it, for those of us with less gray hair, Stuxnet was interesting. It attacked in 3 phases. First, it targeted Microsoft Windows machines and networks, replicating itself. Then it sought out Siemens Step 7 software, which is a bit of Windows-based software used for industrial control systems. Finally, it compromised the PLCs, that's programmable logic controllers, attached to those boxes. But crucially, only if they were operating a very small range of variable frequency drives, centrifuges. The worm's author could then spy on the industrial control systems and cause these fast-spinning centrifuges to tear themselves apart. Now, most speculation identifies Stuxnet targeting Iranian nuclear plants carrying out uranium enrichment. As many as 60% of the identified infected malware machines were in Iran. And the complexity of the worm sort of hints that it was a nation state behind it. Most people believe the United States and Israel. But of course, it was carried into those facilities on infected USB sticks by people who probably should have known better. But it was a fascinating leading indicator for what was to come. This, for instance, is the global distribution of the hosts infected by Karna botnet. Now, the Karna botnet is a bit of internet history, and I actually sort of love it, and I talk about it far too much. It was one of the first pieces of malware specifically designed to attack embedded systems rather than desktop computers. It was built for research purposes by an anonymous researcher to measure the extent of the internet and what the creator called the Great Internet Census of 2012. But the bot made use of almost trivial exploitable security vulnerabilities, default passwords and usernames. And as the author concluded, a lot of the devices and services we have seen during our research should never have been connected to the public internet at all. As a rule of thumb, if you believe that no one would connect that to the internet, really nobody. There are at least 1,000 people that did. And more than a decade that passed, nothing much has changed. We only have to go to Shodan to figure that out. For the most part, the big, wide-scale security compromises we've seen against the Internet of Things have been unsubtle. Mirai, for instance, was a piece of malware that identified vulnerable IoT devices using a list of just 60 or so common factory default usernames and passwords. Logged onto them, took them over, made them part of a botnet. Infected devices continue to function perfectly normally, except for occasional sluggishness. Wow, okay. Early morning. And increased use of bandwidth. So their owners generally didn't notice anything was wrong. The types of devices that were taken over were mostly just IP cameras. But despite that, Mirai became one of the largest, most harmful botnets we've ever had. After Mirai came WannaCry, NotPetya, and others. not specifically all targeting the Internet of Things. Despite that, these attacks shut down wind turbines, factories, and railways. There's a big difference between a breach that puts sensitive data in the hands of an attacker and one that shuts down or even physically damages a piece of expensive infrastructure. And while Stuxnet was the first, there have been other instances of malware that's caused physical damage to infrastructure. In the past, a great deal of computer security has assumed the end user, the attacker, will have no physical access to the computer. If they have physical access, it's game over. But the whole point of the Internet of Things is that they're things you can hold in your hand or hit with a hammer. That changes not just the result of the exploit, but the risks associated with one succeeding, because sometimes the things can hit you back. Back in April 2017, just before midnight, on a clear and entirely cloudless night, the tornado sirens in the greater Dallas-Fort Worth area started to sound, all 156 of them. They sounded for an hour and a half and caused 4,500 people to dial 911. In the end, personnel from the Office of Emergency Management had to drive around the sirens and shut them down manually, one by one. Dallas officials initially blamed a hack to cause the sirens to go off. It turned out that actually attackers had spoofed DTMF tones, encoded commands, on the unmonitored 700 megahertz UHF band that controlled the sirens, and managed to trigger them all. You would have thought they might have been a bit more careful, because the year before, just before the 2016 US presidential election, which in light of recent events seems an awfully long time ago now, someone hacked Dallas's electronic road signs, all of them, to display the claim that Donald Trump is a shape-shifting lizard. Now, I entirely agree with Douglas Adams, who probably had it right about democracy. You don't want the wrong lizard to get in. And in hindsight, it might well have been a whole lot better if he had been. This is a piece of great work, again, a few years ago now, looking at RF leakage from the Ledger Blue cryptocurrency wallet by Thomas Roth, Josh Datto, and Dmitry Nedosparov. RF side channel attack. Now, an RF side channel attack is sufficiently common that there are well-established standards for shielding devices against them. Not everyone pays attention to those standards. Here, each button press on the wallet creates a significant electromagnetic signal around 169 megahertz. However, the really interesting thing here is the team behind the attack used machine learning to recover the PIN number from the leaked RF signals by pattern recognition, which as far as I know was a first. With the Internet of Things, security isn't necessarily about confidentiality. It's not about data. Integrity and availability threats can be much more damaging for connected devices. There are so many moving parts, not necessarily physically moving parts, but that too, but rather interactions. Every time software talks to hardware or other software is an attack surface. I actually think the very idea that hardware is just software wrapped in plastic has done real harm to the way we build smart devices. So many, in fact, the damage can be done by attackers without them even noticing. Just this week, an attack on Microlaise, a telematics company, has left all British prison vans without tracking systems or panic alarms. Serco informed its staff on Monday that vehicle tracking, panic alarms, navigation, and notification related to estimated arrival times were disabled due to the Microlaise incident. There's no suggestion that the attackers had any idea or understood the connection between Microlaise and Serco's prisoner transportation. Ransomware attacks, of course, can be devastating, especially against utilities or heavy industry, where increasing use of internet-connected machines on the shop floor means not just losing data, but capacity. Norsk Hydro is a Norwegian aluminium and renewable energy company. It's one of the largest aluminium companies in the world. Back in 2019 now, it was hit by a ransomware attack. The entire workforce, 35,000 people, had to resort to pen and paper. Production lines shaping molten metal were switched to manual, and in some cases entirely switched off. They had to bring in colleagues from retirement to tell them how to run things. In many cases, production just had to stop. But given the current global political and economic climate, I'm actually a bit more concerned about more subtle threats. It's really very obvious when you suffer from ransomware. It's a lot less obvious if you put fake data into the system, subtly distorting outcomes. During the big droughts in California a few years back now, there was a case where a neighboring vineyard started feeding false data into their neighbor's soil sensors. Apparently, the two vineyard owners weren't particularly on the best of terms. The low moisture readings from the soil sensors triggered sprinklers and led them to overwater their vines. Not only did it lead to a poor crop and poor vintage, the vineyard ended up paying some rather large fines to the county for excess water usage during a drought. I was in the cleanup team for this. It was an interesting one. The Internet of Things is not necessarily about the control of the devices. It's not necessarily about turning things on or off, or at least it shouldn't be. It's about context. Why did the sprinkler system in the vineyard turn on when it received the maliciously injected data? Why did it believe a single data point from a non-existent sensor in a sea of data that should have told it the exact opposite? I actually think the assumption that humans being in the loop from many Internet of Things devices and interactions has fundamentally twisted the way our view of how these things should be built. We tap on a button and the light goes on. It comes down to our assumption that one part of the system can tell another to act. Because we designed so many of these systems around ourselves with a button to turn on the sprinklers, it's far easier to allow the moisture sensors just simply to call an endpoint in the sprinklers and instruct them to turn on, rather than the sprinklers to make their own decisions based on data. After all, that endpoint has to be there anyway, so we have control of the sprinklers ourselves. Now, I'm not a great fan of system-level trust, at least for the Internet of Things, because it ignores the fact in the real world things break. Just because the actor in the system thinks it's trustworthy doesn't mean it actually is. But if you can't impose trust in a system by design, what's left? Well, trust between individuals. Systems like these are called agent-based systems. These types of systems preserve autonomy of individual resources and are often increased adaptability in the face of asynchronously arriving data and damage. The Internet of Things has been, in the past, heavily reliant on cloud infrastructure for its smarts. Temperature sensors in your home have been totally unable to talk to your boiler's thermostat located in the next room without going through a data center in Wisconsin. But that's starting to change. In part, this is due to machine learning. It's allowing us to move the smarts closer to the data. We no longer have to appeal to compute in the cloud to make decisions. Instead, interpreting sensor data can be done at the edge. This has recently led to a resurgence in the popularity of agent-based systems. Service as software is the hottest new buzzword in the Valley, replacing software as a service on every startup's pitch deck. The difference is linguistically quite subtle, but architecturally important. Unfortunately, it turns out that machine learning models are incredibly easy to fool. Two stop signs. The left with real graffiti, something most humans wouldn't even look twice at. The right shows a stop sign with a physical perturbation. Stickers. Somewhat more obvious, but it could easily be disguised as real graffiti. This is what's called an adversarial attack. Those four stickers make machine vision networks designed to control autonomous cars read that stop sign, so obviously a stop sign to you and me, as saying speed limit 45 miles an hour. Not only would the car not stop, it might instead speed up. You can launch similar attacks against face and voice recognition networks. For instance, you can bypass Apple's Face ID liveness detection under some circumstances. You can replace a pair of glasses with tape over the lens. Ask me afterwards how. Unsurprisingly, perhaps, the new hotness generative AI isn't immune to adversarial attacks either. After all, it's just another type of model. But here we see it present in a couple of different ways. First, there is prompt injection. There's some really low-hanging fruit here for models with poor guardrails. The classic is, of course, ignore all previous instructions. Notoriously used on Twitter, this is now a meme. That's how easy it is to do. However, the increased token limit of GPT-4 means it becomes amazingly useful for web scraping. And it does also mean we've started to see indirect prompt injection attacks against these large language models. The most basic form of this is to hide information, leave hidden messages aimed at the AI models in web pages, and try and trick those model-based scrapers. And then mislead the users that have come or will come to rely on them. Indirect prompt injection is somewhat different to prompt injection, where the user knowingly tries to knock the model off task. As in this time, the injection happens by a third party. Much like data injection, mal-data attacks against the Internet of Things, this is an attack by a third party on your own system. When memory with ChatGPT was first launched, giving the model the ability to store information between conversations to give context, a researcher demonstrated how he could trick the model into believing a user was 102 years old and that the Earth was flat. The LLM would incorporate that information in all future conversations with the user. However, it's not just as simple as that. Indirect prompt injection can be used to exfiltrate data. What if those hidden instructions buried in the documents that the user is ingesting into the model tell the model to forward all the conversations to an email address or another URL, because that's what the user is asking it to do by giving the prompt those documents. Alongside prompt injection, we could, of course, do have data poisoning. Here, unlike prompt injection, where the user or a third party is attempting to manipulate an already trained model, in a data poisoning attack, the original data used to train the model is altered, an attempt to deliver a model that gives the wrong answer to what otherwise would be a perfectly valid query. A computer vision model that will consistently, repeatedly, and very insistently identify an apple as an orange, or an attacker trying to enter your building as a member of staff. We're increasingly seeing AI deployed at the edge doing face recognition, gait analysis, all of these sorts of protective things. If the models behind these AI sensors deployed at the edge, which essentially to us look like black boxes, have been trained on poisoned data, you have a problem. I talked earlier about how we all love a sophisticated attack. The potential of data poisoning against models is exactly as scary as any other type of supply chain attack. And with recent events around exploiting pages, it's pretty obvious how devastating those can be. But I think they're going to be just as rare. I honestly don't really believe the security problem with models is going to be how we can attack them. It's their attacks on us, or rather, how easy it's going to be to make social engineering. Because there's a lot of ways these new models can be used for harm, including things like reducing the barrier of entry for spam to even lower levels than we'd previously seen. And to be clear, it was pretty easy for folks to pull together convincing spam in the past. But perhaps the most concerning thing I've seen is discussion around automated radicalization. The new text models make so-called fake news and disinformation all that much more easily generated across language barriers. Until now, such disinformation often relied heavily on imaging, and the uncanny valley meant that AI models struggled with generating photorealistic images that could pass human scrutiny. The hands were an especially tough problem for earlier AI models. These photos, allegedly shot at a French protest rally, look real, if it wasn't for the appearance of the six-fingered man. It appears Count Rugen is a long way from Florin in The Revenge of Inigo Montoya. The reason why models have been poor at representing hands in the past is actually incredibly complicated. And there isn't a definitive answer, but it probably is down to training data. But that's going away. Recent updates to versions of Midjourney can now generate hands correctly. Whereas its predecessor had a more painterly, stylized bent, the newest versions of Midjourney are far more photorealistic out of the box. We all need to apply critical thinking to images and text we see online. To be clear, you should have always applied critical thinking to images and text you saw online. But it's going to become a lot more important. Especially, and even, the imagery purports to be photography. Imagery designed to incite some sort of emotional or political reaction, fake news, disinformation, has never been easier to generate. It turns out that today's human-run scams aren't limited by the number of people who respond to the initial email. That's pretty scary. Instead, they're limited by the labor-intensive process for persuading those people to send the scammer some money. Scam emails today are so obvious that they have become a punchline to a joke. I am the son of the late king of Nigeria, and I'm in need of your assistance. Money? Anyone? But they were that obvious for a reason. These emails weed out all of the most gullible responders. More complex scams, long-running financial scams, known as pig butchering in the trade, are a lot more high effort. And this is where large language models can easily make a difference. For pig butchering, hallucination is a feature, not a bug. The model's ability to confidently roll with the punches will prove useful. The victim pool who will fall from model-enabled but still automated conversation, which will be a lot more subtle and flexible in a series of stock emails, is going to be a lot larger than those of us believe that the son of the late king of Nigeria wants to give us $1 million. And alongside image generators and language models I've been talking about are voice models. Online trolls already used 11 Labs text-to-speech modules to make replica voices of people without their consent, using clips of the voices found online. Potentially anyone with even a few minutes of voice publicly available, YouTubers, social media influencers, politicians, journalists, me, could be susceptible to this sort of voice cloning. If you don't think that's much of a problem, there are a number of banks, both in the US and here in Europe, that use Voice ID as a secure way to log onto your account over their phone or in the app. It's been proved possible to trick such systems with AI-generated voices. Your voice is no longer a secure biometric, if it ever was. These sort of dangers are only going to increase as models get more levers on the world. Our models now mostly support plugins. We've added eyes and ears and hands to our models. Plugins are tools explicitly designed for language models to access up-to-date information, run computations, and use third-party software. Everything from Expedia to Klarna. You're going to be able to book a flight, get a loan, and rent an apartment right from the prompt. It's no longer 2021 for ChatGPT. The model can reach out and interact with humans, not just web pages. You need to draw a line in the sand right here and right now and stop thinking about these models as chatbots. They are not that anymore. They're cognitive engines, story-driven bundles of reasoning, soon to be plugged directly into the same APIs that our apps on our own phones use, that we use to make changes in and interact with the real world around us. Of course, third-party code means bigger attack surface, and we've already seen proof of concept attacks. This is an example where multiple plugins have been combined together to exfiltrate private data, in this case your email, via a prompt injection attack. Basically, our machine learning models can now browse the web, build and order a product, add it to a shopping cart, and buy it on your behalf, all without you interfering. Although if it ends up spending $95 to buy 2 large pizzas, much like, I'm really going to have words with them. I really am. It obviously has a long way to go before you should order it, before you should trust it to order dinner. We can now hand over full control of our computers to models and let it access our files, browse the web, and even apply for jobs on our behalf. If you put yourself into the shoes of an attacker, imagine being able to inject this piece of software, this agent, onto your target's machine. The model will figure out where the data is that you're after, that you're looking for, where it lives on the file system. And then it will figure out how to exfiltrate the data back to you all on its own. You don't actually have to understand the internals in the system. The model trained on these sorts of attacks could do it for you. No doubt this is a thing that will exist soon, if it doesn't already exist now. As an industry, we've been notoriously and consistently bad at protecting our users' privacy and security. 10 years of working on big data back in the day convinced me that the technology industry is arrogant and childish. Move fast and break something shouldn't apply to our personal privacy or our civilization. But this time, I'm actually starting to wonder, as an industry, whether for once we're going to be slightly better at dealing with the consequences of our actions. All the right people seem to be saying the right things. There even seems to be some people following through and doing the right things. There seems to be a solid emphasis on guardrails around AI, and there have been a number of interesting proposals about how to protect people. One of our old friends of mine, Alasdair, has suggested watermarking all AI text by using different Unicode values so that we can distinguish AI written text from human written text, even though the letters will look exactly the same on the screen. Unicode works across all devices, doesn't need any changes about how people use the internet. It's one of those classic bolt-on measures that doesn't break anything that already exists. And it's pretty easy for folks to adopt. Yes, you can take the AI written text and get rid of the Unicode that marks it as coming from an AI, but why would you want to if it shows provenance? It's a remarkably simple suggestion that actually fixes a lot of corner cases. People can cheat, but there are obvious benefits to not cheating. Apple recently made some interesting announcements about combining homomorphic encryption, a type of encryption that allows mathematical operations to be performed on encrypted data without decrypting it first, and machine learning. What that means is that your private data can be pooled with other data, external data sources, and used to securely to improve your model and as a part of your prompt without revealing your private data to anyone else, including, weirdly enough, the model. It stays encrypted end to end. In some ways, this is HTTPS moment for AI. Things have moved insanely fast over the last year or two, and we're in a very different place now than we were just even 6 months ago. New opportunities means new threats. New technology brings change and historically has always brought new opportunities and new jobs. Jobs that 10 years before didn't exist. And fighting change is like fighting the wind. It's entirely pointless. The best we can do is make sure that change is measured and limit any damage, both to individuals and to our underlying civilization. So always remember, A new life awaits you in the off-world colonies as a kill switch engineer. Thank you.